Welcome to the Happy Mindset, episode number 97. Today's episode is called Knowledge Stacks. So today I'm going to talk about this concept of stacking your knowledge. So this is one of the benefits to being a polymath. This is one of the many benefits to being a polymath. There's some drawbacks to being a polymath, but this is the benefit that I've seen over the years, is understanding this reality of how knowledge stacks itself over time. So what made me think about this is I got a question from Peter after he read my book. He asked me about making a shift in his career. So he's in finance. He doesn't hate it. He seems to still like finance, but he's got this desire in him to want to code, want to learn to code. So his question was like, how does he know when to do that? The one thing that occurred to me straight away was that the fact that he doesn't hate what he's already in, he enjoys finance and he's already got experience in that. Then the intersection there would be fintech. So instead of going binary on things, this is the way I used to look at things before I became a polymath. I would have went binary. So if I just felt like I didn't hate my job, but I had this sense that something else is pulling me some other direction, I would have went binary on it. So I would have went like, okay, this pull over here is much stronger than my desire to continue this path, so I'm going to cut this path off completely and I'm going to move over here to coding. Whereas in reality, you don't want to ever compartmentalize your experiences and your skill sets like that, because your skill sets can benefit you in the long term. So like fintech there, for example, if you're somebody with just a technical background in coding, then you're at a disadvantage to somebody who's got both. So in reality, when you work for a business, as a coder, you need to also understand, at some level, you need to understand the business objectives of what you're actually technically making for them. So if you're somebody who already understands finance, then you're going to understand the business model and you're going to understand the consumers. Because you're a finance person, you'll be able to speak their language. So you're going to stand out more so than somebody who's just got a technical background, because they might be able to do a lot of complicated things, but if they don't translate into a business need, it's useless. They could do the best things in the world technically, but if it's not relevant and it can actually affect the bottom line of a business, then it's not really needed. So what that does for you is that it lowers as well the level of expertise you need to get to initially in that technical skill, because the company will see that you've already got a strong finance background, and if you're decent technically, they'll know that you'll be able to improve on that. If it's a genuine passion of yours, you will improve at that. So it puts you at a very strong place in the marketplace, because fintech is a big industry as well. So that's the example there. So I've learned this over time, that knowledge stacks. I learned it through experience. It wasn't a very easy experience, because it's not a linear path. But the thing is, not many things are actually linear in the real world. The real world doesn't work really in a linear way. It doesn't account for exponential growth you can see in the real world. The real world doesn't always line up with how our brains think in a linear way. So that's just a bit of perspective there. We might think that if you pursue a finance path your whole life, that it's a very linear progression, which it can be, but then the world can act strange like right now, and you might lose your job and you mightn't know what to do next. So I found that from having a polymath approach to life, it is a longer term game. It's actually harder as well, because you're going against the curve. Most people wouldn't be able to stick at transitioning between different careers. So my initial degree was in business and French, then I pivoted. I spent a year teaching, then I pivoted to master's in translation, so it was more the linguistic field, where I felt like an imposter because I felt I was more of a business person, because my major was business, my minor was only French. So when I was going to these lectures in my master's degree, they were talking about syntax and semantics. I didn't even know what that meant when I went to my first few lectures, and this was their language. So I was like, oh fuck, this is going to be a huge learning curve for me. So that was daunting, but because I had that passion to learn languages, I really like languages. So I stuck at it and it worked out. Then the next thing I went to was customer support. Didn't think that I was going to end up there after my master's degree. I had envisioned I'd become a translator, but then I realized after I did the translations masters, there weren't an awful lot of jobs translation wise. And I was just happy to be using my language. So I took a customer support role which was French as well. I didn't actually end up using a lot of French in that job, but on my next job, when I returned to Ireland, I got a technical support role where I was using French. It was just French. So I was on a French team and I was speaking French. And that gave me a taste for technical subjects. I was learning a little bit about Wi-Fi. It was an Internet of Things device. It was a thermostat, a smart thermostat that I was giving support to customers over. And that gave me a taste for technical stuff. My master's had given me a slight taste of it because I had to use CAT tools for my summer for translating. And in this job, it gave me the Wi-Fi. And then I met a friend, William Kennedy. He was on an episode very early in this podcast. He gave me the desire to want to learn to code because he was self-learning to code. I'd self-learned Spanish and Italian, so that gave me that possibility that this is something you can do. You can self-learn things. And William had such a desire to do this, and he eventually got a job, that it made me believe that I could do it. And so that was the next pivot into software development. That pivot again was made initially easier because when I met William, I had already self-learned Spanish and Italian to a decent level conversationally. Went on to get qualifications and those things just to be sure that I actually had a decent level in them. Because I did it in a very unconventional way, in a very quick and condensed way. So I wanted to be sure that it actually measured up to the education system as well, that I wasn't fooling myself. So by meeting William, who was also self-learning, I had that experience where I learned Spanish and Italian, but then as well, I started looking at that as a language. So with the coding, I started looking at it as a language in regards to like the process I had for learning Spanish and Italian, like the 80-20 principle. What's the most important things here? That really reduces the amount of things you have to learn, because when I was looking at it through the 80-20 lens, I was looking at 20% of the things that would get me 80% of the outcome. So I started looking at for loops. I started looking at while loops was initially, well, don't actually use them a lot, but for loops, very, very important to wrap your head around that concept and be able to actually use it. And like basic data structures in Python would be dictionaries, lists. Like it's really just looking at the very vital, fundamental things that will help you to create a project. So think about the project and work backwards. So it's the same thing with languages. With the Spanish and Italian, I was thinking about where do I want to get to. It was conversational fluency. What is that? It's being able to actually talk about a topic and have a conversation. So you pick the topic. The topic for me was sport. So I'm going to start learning sport words. So I'm going to start learning phrases that are commonly used. So that'll be the glue that glues together these random words I'm learning in sport. So I'll have a conversation here. So then I've got the structure of the sentence. I can learn another topic. Then I speak in that topic, and you just continue on like that. With the coding, it was pick a project. Okay, I'm gonna build a blog. What framework I'm gonna use? I'm gonna use Flask to begin with. What's it gonna look like? What's the posts? What are they constructed of? What do you need to learn? It'll be like you learn OOP. There's actually classes, functions. There's not an awful lot of things. Once you get clear on the vital few things to learn, it'll take practice and repetition and reading, because even for loops for me, it took a while for me to wrap my head around that. It was strange because on the surface it looked very, very simple. It was like, I think this is where a lot of people come stuck on things. They look at things and they're like, oh, it's very simple, it's basic, it's beginner, and they try and move on quickly, and they don't actually spend time mastering and practicing the very basics. So that's been my approach to accelerate my learning, is to actually, what are the basic fundamental few things that matter here? And I'm going to spend a lot of time practicing these concepts and reinforcing them until I get them. And you start building subtle things on top of that towards mastery over time. But the mastery I found is like a long-term approach. So when I'm learning a skill, the way to accelerate your learning is to look at it through the 80-20 lens, look for the vital few things that are important, and practice them. And then when you are gradually getting to terms with that, gradually bring in things, small things, it's kind of like you got the foundation of the building, now you're just building layer upon layer of bricks over time. The mastery is never ending. Like, you're never going to it's like building the Tower of Babel. There's no there's no limit to it. We're never going to get to the sky or beyond space. So mastery, think of mastery as like actually building the tower, but to begin with, you need to master the foundation. You need to build the foundation strong, so that, because everything else is based off a strong foundation. If you haven't got a strong foundation to build with, you're never going to build a tower. But if you spend enough time to begin with on the foundation, and you keep having the foundation in mind as well as you go up, what you're building, that will stand. That's got a better possibility of standing the test of time. So with knowledge stacks, anyway, let's come back to knowledge stacks. I kind of went off maybe on a bit of a tangent there. Hope that's useful. It's basically focus on the foundation, know what the foundation is, build a strong one, and then mastery is building a tower brick by brick after that. So with the knowledge stacks, so in my current role, so I got this job 10 months ago in fintech. So I didn't know anything about finance. My major was in marketing. Coding, I've been practicing it for a while, maybe 2 years at that point, and I had a decent level, but I didn't really know where I was at. I could build some practical stuff, but theory-wise and conceptually, and a data science level, computer science level, I don't think I was that great. But then it's hard to measure yourself. But anyway, when I got the job, because I was strong enough technically to get this entry-level role, I already had that experience in translation. Because with translation, what that opened my eyes to was the fact that you need to be strong technically in translating between the languages, finding the right words for the right context, but then you also need to be strong in the context. You need to understand the subject matter, and you understand the subject matter by reading around the topic. So, for example, I translated a Sigmund Freud article on psychoanalysis, the healing properties of delusions of schizophrenia. Number one, I was interested in it because of my own personal experiences with mental health and mental illness. And number two, no, that was just it. Number one, I was interested in that. But I realized that from doing that, I had to be well read around Freud. So I already had that natural buy-in, so I was going to read it anyway. But I realized from the translating that you need to read a large body of their work in order to be able to understand the context and convey the correct meaning as well. Psychoanalysis is actually I found psychoanalysis very hard to translate. So I translated a psychoanalysis text by Freud from English to French. And I did one in Spanish too. So I did a Spanish extended translation about, I think it was the effects of depression in HIV patients. And I actually got a better grade in Spanish than French. From the outside, you're like, what the fuck? You went to college, you studied French. You went to France, you lived there for 2 years. You studied Spanish as a language hacker for maybe 3 months. And then in college, you studied, for your master's, you did 2 semesters of Spanish intermediate level. And then you went on to get a better grade in Spanish than you did in French. Like, what's going on there? What's going on there is because psychoanalysis was harder to translate because they use normal words a lot of the time in a very different way to the way we do in normal everyday language. It was the turn of phrase that really was difficult, I found, in psychoanalysis. Whereas with the Spanish text, it was more normal everyday general language, but there was technical terms that were easier to translate, because technical terms, oftentimes you'll just get one translation for it. So you've got the correct word, and then you just need to be familiar with the pattern of the language, just general language. It's not that hard. But with psychoanalysis, when the turn of phrase can sometimes be completely different, and what they say means something completely different to what it does normally, that makes things very, very difficult. So that was why I got a better grade in Spanish than French. But from that experience, I learned that it's not just about technically being good at the language, it's also about the subject matter, being good in that subject matter. Like, so with the finance, it's like if you've got a very good understanding of finance to begin with, and you bring that, if you stack that with coding skills, then you're going to stand out compared to somebody who's just got a computer science background and can't speak their language. So it's all about speaking the language of the business, knowing who they are, what they want practically, so you can build practical, simple fit for purpose solutions for them. And even when they get problems, when there's problems that inevitably come up with bugs, or the user might change their mind that wasn't the feature that they wanted, the communication is going to be a bit easier too than somebody who's very strong technically but can't communicate, and there's just frustration and you come at loggerheads and nothing gets done, and there's a lot of anxiety and anger and stuff that's not productive. So that's basically knowledge stacking. So you can apply this to anything. So if you're somebody right now who's been affected by what's going on in the world, don't cut off your experience no matter what it is. You could be bartending, you could be in a shop. Look at the skill set, and that's how you sell yourself to the next thing. So if you're a person who has been working in a pub for years, or you're more of a customer facing role, but you've got a drive to learn to code and you're building stuff, then when you apply for jobs, you don't have to overlook your experience or even be embarrassed about your experience as well. Like when I had customer support roles as well, sometimes you feel like these roles are kind of beneath you and stuff, and you don't want to put them in because maybe they're not relevant. But put any experience that you have in, but look at why that experience is relevant. Think about why it's relevant. Don't just put it in either for the sake of it. If you don't know why it's relevant, I'd probably say to not put it in. But anything is relevant if you have the eyes for it. So with bartending or working in a shop, you're developing customer facing skills, you're developing people skills. In a business, you need that too, because people are in a business. You need to be able to communicate between teams. So if you've got strong people skills, you'll be able to understand them and convey your message as well. So your team as well will like you. If they're not particularly great at the communication skills, at least they have somebody in the team who can communicate what they are saying. So you're understanding what they're saying on a technical level within your team, and then you're able to convey that to the non-technical people. So that's a very valuable person again. But yeah, I guess the main lesson with knowledge stacking, look for the skill underneath the job. Look for the skill set. And I've just been sharing some examples today. So that's how you go about transitioning things in your life. Just look at the skills, look at the human beings, and you'll be able to make better progress that way. It's all about things not being too daunting. It's a big task to upskill yourself and to change domain. So I'm not going to overlook that. It takes a lot of intellectual and emotional growth to pivot and to change careers. But it's not impossible if you've got the right eyes for it. Like what I'm saying, I guess to sum up today, look at 80-20. If you have to learn something very quickly in an unorthodox way, then 80-20 is the best principle that I have seen for doing that, getting eyes for that. Then after that, think about mastery as just like adding more bricks to the tower. It's never ending. It's always more the things that you can learn. And that's the main things to keep in mind. Just think about 80-20 principles to begin with, and never forget about that. You can always improve those 20% of things as well, just because they're the core foundation. And then the other thing is mastery is just brick by brick, day by day. If it's a passion, you won't hate it. It'll actually be an art form and something you actually enjoy doing, that you're getting better at your craft. There'll be a sense of progress and achievement from that when you pick the right things for you. And so when knowing when to pivot as well, that was the other question by Peter. If you've got a strong desire to follow something, if it's out of curiosity, I would encourage you to follow it. But you don't have to be reckless, like I said at the start. It's not a binary thing. It's not about I need to follow my curiosity or I need to be in a dead-end job that I don't like. It's soul destroying. No, you can combine them together. So you can either find ways to bring in your curiosity and your passion project into your current role, or just let it play out and just follow the two of them and see where they go. And then over time, you'll see whether it makes sense to stay with the company, or maybe you might find a better opportunity where you can combine your two things, your expertise and your passion. And passion is another very loaded word. For me, it's all about just follow your curiosities in life, and you can do that in a practical way as well. You don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's not an all or nothing zero-sum game. So hope that's been helpful today. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.